Let's get started. As the panel has already been introduced, this will be about. There's been a lot of transformation that has happened, particularly post-pandemic as such, and there are a lot of new topics that are gained relevance from well-being to belongingness, diversity, and inclusion. Apart from challenges of remote work, hybrid work, and a lot of newer challenges that we will learn today. So without much ado, maybe I'll first put the challenge or question to Vikas. Vikas, please tell us what you think are some of the high-level HR challenges that we look forward to in 2020.
Yeah, this is working. Well, thanks, Sayeed. Thanks for the question. Just remember what I told you. You got to stop me. Okay?
I will.
I'm going to keep it short. Okay, so I've got a lot of cognitive load here. So just like him, I've got my cue cards on the thing. In my view, when it comes to some of the challenges that we are currently facing with, you got to look at what has been the journey for HR over the last few years. I mean, there's a very interesting phase that came in between, which we said the COVID era. There was a life before COVID, there was a life post-COVID. Now, if you just stay with me on this one, now you would see that pre-COVID, the way we would look at an employee, just another brick in the wall, a lot of that has changed. Because you're now struggling with the war of talent. Because what's happened is that, especially in the IT sector and a few others, people are now used to this whole business of working from home, okay? And they know that, well, we all know stories where people have done roles while they were sitting at home, and that's where the whole moonlighting concept and so on and so forth came in. So the HR folks are right now going through a war of talent to say that how do I keep this guy happy? How do I ensure that this person stays with me? So on and so forth. But that's still very high level. But to my mind, if you really dig deep, the core challenges that we all are facing are basically, since this is more on the tech and all of that, I think there's a lot of disparate systems in the organization that we have. Now, these disparate systems are not just technologies. It's also about the people who are working in silos. Now, if I was to look at a team as a system and say that, are these teams really collaborating? There's a Microsoft survey that came out that after COVID, people have not really gone to the levels of collaboration that they were doing pre-COVID. That's been a huge challenge. Yet another is about this whole data, okay? We have gone global because one thing COVID also taught us was that, the territories for doing businesses can be expanded because you could possibly do business using Zoom or whatever, remotely. So those lines have got blurred, due to which, the whole business of how are you protecting data, and this PII data or whatever, that becomes yet another challenge. So these are some very tactical challenges that I think a lot of HR people are facing with, but then there's the very interesting ones that all of us live every day with. There's an advent of this whole millennial, and then there's alpha which is being prepared for, and that has led us to, deal with these multi-generations where the new guard and the old guard doesn't get along. Okay, there is a battle in these meeting rooms where people say, well, who are you? You just joined this company, or you're a youngster, you're going to teach me. And this youngster thinks that, well, you've been here in this organization for 25 years. What do you know how the world goes around outside? I think at the end of the day, these are all issues of ego, control, scope, and span. But that's a huge challenge that a lot of organizations, especially the ones with scale, are currently facing. And the last but not the least, yes, sir, the last but not the least is pretty much around, saying that with this whole, a lot of us HR folks, they get carried away with tech, okay? And we say, oh, well, I heard about this technology. If I have a budget, let me acquire it. So it is more around peer influence rather than saying that what does this tech really solve for me, okay? And that's yet another. So I just kind of sum it up there.
Yeah, thanks. Chryslynn, carrying on from what Vikas was mentioning, of course, there are issues of collaboration that are important for the post-pandemic situation, and also how we leverage tech and data. But from a EI perspective and from belongingness, what are some of challenges that you think are relevant?
Sure. So I think just to add on to what he just shared, there was a lot of focus, and this is something we've observed with the companies we've been working with. There was a lot of focus on employee well-being for the longest time. Started in the pandemic, we wanted to take care of them not just in the workplace, we've even had companies reach out for domestic violence. So that's the level of assistance that organizations were extending to employees. But I think now with the uncertainty, with the recession and the whole bunch of other different challenges HR faces, a lot of organization leaders are observing what we call leadership burnout. So today we are seeing that HR is acknowledging that one of the biggest challenges is to deal with the burnout and stress of managers and leaders who are leading their teams through these very difficult times. So I think that's one. And the second is, as you mentioned, the nature of the workplace, this idea of inclusion keeps changing. And it's very important for us to not just have a sense or a pulse of what are the expectations in the head office, but also to go slightly beyond. I know I met a couple of you who also have factory setups, those of you who have warehouses. Their idea of psychological safety, their idea of physical safety, there are certain expectations that these employees also have. So I think for HR to be able to identify these and be able to create initiatives that are impactful and sustainable in these difficult times, I think that's something that's important.
Great. Yeah. Please, yeah, you're next. Ketan, again, to continue the discussion, from your perspective, what do you think are some of the HR challenges that are top of the mind in 2020? Yes.
Sure. So I'll give my perspective from the three stages of the organization. So I the brand that I work with, Rentomojo, we can call ourselves a mid-sized organization with about 700, 800 people. Then I work with a lot of early stage startups, and then historically I've worked with large organizations. So for very, very early stage organization, I think a big challenge that's going to come is on hiring of talent, right? Because we've seen what's happened to the Googles and the Microsoft of the world. So suddenly that sense of security is very, very high. Stability is going to be an ask. And I know when candidates are asking founders, what's your runway, right? And then this is very early stage. And I think that's a reality. And very young organizations who got funded, but they don't know if next 6 months, 12 months, 14 months, if they would have additional funding, I think they are going to face a huge challenge. The second challenge for them is about retention. Now that they have to conserve what they have, it's very difficult, to retain people only on the perspective of money. So a lot on the HR front is going to happen there. Now, if I come to mid-sized organization, the biggest challenge is going to be, how to keep your workforce engaged, right? Because they've seen stability. They understand that it's a good organization to be in. But how do we maximize what, we get out of it is going to be a challenge that, typically the mid-sized organization are going to face. Large organizations, I think the conversation in the boardroom is mostly about, like Google and Microsoft and the others, did you also hire more than what was required? I'm sure these conversations are happening. I'm just hoping that it doesn't translate into the way it is translated with a lot of product companies. But these are the three stage-wise challenges that I see. Very important, I think, during the COVID time, empathy is what actually came out, how it was supposed to be. I think for the first time, I saw managers doing what they were supposed to do. They were owning engagement. They were communicating, right? HR actually became a partner. But with coming back to offline, I think that's going to be a challenge of, how to avoid the world to go back to the pre-era where suddenly, it's again mechanized and people are just getting anything and everything, done with the team members and losing that personal connect. So that's from my side.
Sure, great. So we'll continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Sayeed. And I was taking the cue from Ketan. Okay, so you mentioned about the challenges in the startup ecosystem. And I'm currently in a startup scale-up ecosystem. And I think one of the biggest challenges is showing empathy. And I've personally gone through this, wherein we needed to let go in a startup ecosystem. And the kind of show of empathy that we could give to our people, ensure that their futures we will somehow secure in other organizations. I think that's very important because as an organization, we are also building brand. Wherein we are also going to face challenge of hiring new talent. Talent is going to see, okay, your organization has done this. Security is topmost in their mind. I have been asked questions like, what about security? Are we secure enough? Do we have enough runway? What do you see the product growth? Though we are a larger MNC and we have operations across the world as well, but people have these concerns. And the biggest challenge of HR will be to understand people from these perspectives. While we are building our brand, we have to build also on the empathy side. We have to build on the talent retention side. People within the organization, we have to focus more on what kind of engagement are we doing with them. One of the challenges that we have been facing is while we get people back to offices, the engagement model we have to improve. We are trying to see the personal touch that we would like to give to them. The health and wellness, which we had, I don't think we have overdone, but we have shown a lot of empathy and care to them and their families. Are we being empathetic enough right now to include those when you're back physically, back in office? Organizations need to retweak their policies and processes as and when we are getting back people, we are looking at their development and growth aspects as well. One of the key challenges that HR is going to face for startup ecosystems is how do you connect the business goals to the person in the bottom line as well? Are they able to see their contributions in the same way that the business is seeing? Are you being valued enough? Then only you will be able to retain them. So it also leads back to those strategies as well. I think I will just leave it off to others also to add more points over here, Sudeep.
Hi. So I think I have a very different perspective because I'm probably one of those blessed souls who work with three quadrants. I work with corporates, I work with partners like greytHR, and I work with government a lot, right? So, of course, Government of India and Skilling India and etc. So I have three things to say, and all of them start with S. S is, of course, the first one is sustainability. Every organization looks forward to meet their numbers, and those are important. But at the same time, how do you ensure that the employee or the lowest common denominator employee is happy? Yet, and how, probably the first 3 years, it's a very different integrated flow. And the next 3 years is very different. And how once the organization is 10 years old, it's very different. I'm a person who come from technical background and of course management. So I speak these languages of integration and etc. But they really kind of help it out. So this is the first one. And I think as an HR, you have to play the role of the balance. You have to ensure that an employee is successfully happy. Is just not happy for the purpose of happy, is been successfully happy. And that success somehow integrates back to the achievement of the business goals of the organization as well. So I think whether it is hiring, I think the focus a lot is on hiring, but I think there is a word called retrain. I think the world is moving towards a lot of retrain, because if I close my mind that, probably I did a wrong hiring, I will live with that for very long, but I will not be able to be right. See, it's not about being profit. At times, the aspect is not about being right. It's about profitable. So that's how I think the world moves to. The second thing is, which is very important, which is the skilling part. There's a lot of work that is happening. Government is doing a lot of work on skilling. But I think the final outcome is the lad turns around or the girl turns around and say, what will I get out of going through this skilling? Will I get a job? Will I get the next role? So I think before we roll it out that this is what skilling is all about, we need to know the outcome of it. And the two most important things about any skilling program or training program is governance. It's about getting first get the train out of the station, I think, and then you need to see that every train passes the signal without hitting each other. I think that's very important. And that's going to help, because once you get that, then you can actually see more people interested. And the last one is, I think, Gen Z, because I deal with I go to colleges and I deal with a lot of those people. I think the social quotient. Please understand, there were times when I think I was growing up and we used to catch up during Cyber Cafe and everything. I know I was started my career with HSBC and which company you work, what you are learning. So people used to kind of talk, connect and all. Today, the social quotient is very important. How important are you to the society gets determined by the number of contacts you have, by the number of people who appreciate the work you are doing. So hence, as an HR, I need to ensure that my company's social quotient is high, my employee social quotient is high, and the success is extremely viral for people to look at it, adopt it, because that's what Gen Z is interested about. A lot of it I've seen where people come for interviews, they ask me those questions that, what is so latest about your company I wanted to find? I didn't find anything in the last 1 month. I want to see more of blogs. When I ask them, what do you think we can do differently? So I think these are things which are a challenge for HR, that how do you keep pace with the demands of the changing world and etc.
Thanks. Yeah.
So I think overall, I mean, everybody has sort of spoken about most of the key points, and it's always an advantage to go towards the end, because then I can summarize whatever everybody else has said. But if I have to just add in just a few things, I think personally in the current times, HR as a function has undergone, I think these are historic times of disruption and change that we as a function are actually seeing. And it's something which I don't think we ever expected. More so because not just the post-pandemic scenario, which is there at present, but there is so much economic uncertainty in the world today. There is so much political tensions that all of this in some way or the other affects the function, affects the HR fraternity, and poses different set of challenges. And I think it's moving at such a fast-paced setup today that I think every quarter, every month, we read something, we hear something, and we always have to be on our toes. And we sort of have to develop a strategy. How do we retain? How do we hire? How do we upskill our workforce? Having said that, I think right now there is a lot of focus on employee experience per se, because I think at least in the current times for HR, it's how HR aligns some of its technology systems with the key tenets of if I would call it key tenets of an employee experience strategy, which is something which I think we are gradually moving towards. I think employee experience is no longer an HR strategy; it's a business strategy. And I think that's what most organizations today are, whether we look at some of our internal policies, whether we are trying to, go ahead with the times or moving with the flow of the various changing scenarios in the marketplace. So that's one. And of course, when we talk of employee experience, the next thing is, of course, the leadership and manager effectiveness, which I think Ketan just pointed out that there's a term which everybody says empathetic, so I think today for HR as a function, we really want some of our managers and leadership to be able to work on those specific skill sets, which is around being empathetic, of course, being adaptable, and also being resilient with the kind of changes which are happening. There was this, I was just reading a ring on Gartner. There was a Gartner report which recently came out where there is a particular thing which they call, they coined the term called human leadership nowadays. And when we speak of human leadership, it's actually very challenging, even for HR to be able to build that kind of commitment and courage, to be to give that to our leaders, for them to be able to answer employees and to be able to go out there and make those kind of difficult decisions. So the human concept of leadership, which is the fear, the doubt, the uncertainty, that sort of sometimes comes out. So now for us, for HR, it's always a challenge to be able to reduce, how do we go out there and help managers, navigate through these emotional barriers. So that becomes a challenge because more or less, as all of us here have spoken, that employee well-being is now the ask of the hour. And when we say employee well-being, we're not just focusing on one aspect, which is one singular aspect of physical health. We're no longer speaking on that. We're talking of emotional, mental health. We're talking of financial well-being, which is again such a big concept, and it's become like the theme for many organizations who are designing their benefits and tailoring some of their benefits around how to keep their employees motivated. So by and large, I think these were maybe the top 2 or 3 challenges that we would specifically see in 2023, and I'm sure that this will keep evolving. It's not something which is going to be stagnant for a long time.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I think the problem with HR is it's so much surface area and there's so many concerns as such. Among 6 of us, we already have probably a dozen to 18 things that we could probably drill down and get deeper. But of course, we have. Ketan, you mentioned about the challenges of hiring, attracting talent, and more importantly, now retaining talent. Of course, for different types of industries. What are some ideas that you have seen around, or what has worked for you, and how tech is helping you also bridge those gaps?
So I'll break it into 2 parts. Sayeed, one is something that I shared with you earlier also on how to look at HR tech, and second is what am I seeing in this space. So I have an 8-year-old. She came from school one day and she spoke about Papa, I've learned something very interesting about foods. I said, what is that? She said there are 3 kinds of food: go food, grow food, and glow food. Go food is whatever gives us energy. Grow is whatever is important for our next steps. And glow is about happiness, about well-being. Now, if you look at HR tech and HR space also, the moment I started to put them into these buckets, I started to get very, very interesting answers, because grow is payroll, any system that I need for processes, systems, policies. I look at that differently. When I look at a growth intervention from HR Tech, which could be about performance management, which could be about learning and development, coaching, then I look at products differently. And when I look at glow, well-being, we talk about B&I for that matter, I think this bucketing becomes important for the decision that you want to take, because these 3 all have different objectives. Now, I work with a venture capital also. Now, something very interesting that has happened is never before, so we get a lot of applications from various companies. Never has it happened that 6 to 7% of the applications for investment is coming from HR. I think that's good news. But the problem is, I think a lot of them evolved during COVID times to address very specific niche problem. And today, all of them literally are behind me saying that take it for free. Now that's at times, I get a sense that should I just take it? I think a lot of these products come in and people are just offering anything under the roof. So be very cautious about what you're picking up. I would not recommend to rush into anything just because it's looking very interesting. It is something that you've been planning to do. It's cost effective or it's free. Just don't get into it. Right? Because I burnt my fingers. We took a product, brilliant product. We created bite-sized, training learning opportunities for our field staff, and the company shut down. Right? Now imagine the kind of what's the perception about the organization people are building. So that's the only call out for the HR tech. Don't rush into it, and go very deep to understand what actually you're looking to solve, and go with partners who have the credibility of being there for quite some time. Just don't rush into it. I think this market is for a year is what I anticipate. You're going to get a lot of free tools, but just think twice before you just jump into it.
Yeah, Krishna. So some of the challenges that you spoke about, collaboration and other things. So how do you think What are the strategies that you're using, and what has worked for you, or some stories that you would like to share about?
Sure. So there are actually two things that I want to talk about in terms of strategies and tech. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, people think it's only training. There's a lot more, and there's a lot of tech that has also evolved over time. But I'm going to add to what you said, Ketan. Don't jump into it. Everyone's experimenting. You can start out. So there are two things. If you feel you want to start out your DEI journey, there are some basic things you are already using, right? Google Meets, Zoom, they've evolved significantly. Now, once again, I'm going to come to my previous point. Grow that conversation of diversity and inclusion beyond your head office to some of your other regional spaces. For a very long time, this idea of workplace safety, POSH, a lot of us talk about POSH, right, was only restricted to looking at the needs of those in our head offices, in our tier 1 cities. But today, because of technology, you're able to have those conversations across locations. So if you set up an internal committee, for example, it is people from your head office. It is not people who are sitting in your factories or your warehouses. So access to your internal committee becomes very difficult. But when you have trainings, when you have these virtual meetings where people have a face to that name on the poster, it's not just a policy, then you are increasing access to people across your organization. So use the existing tech that you have for your benefit when you talk about DEI. If you are in a more advanced stage, there are some wonderful, there are different applications actually. If you're talking about attracting good candidates, one of the things that people talk about is how your JDs are put out. When we talk about DEI, for example, we always think about how is recruitment being conducted. But it's one step before that. What is the kind of JD that you're putting out there? So Text.io allows you to run your job description through their software and point out how inclusive or how gendered it is. And it helps you increase your chances of attracting more diverse talent. You have Grammarly, which is an extension to your existing emails and all the communication that you do internally. It's not just a spell check. It also helps you identify how inclusive your communication is. So these are small things that you can they're incredible free versions as well. But these are different small steps that you can take on to ensure that you are attracting good talent, and as well as you're keeping the inclusion conversation ongoing internally. So yeah.
It has to make an entry.
So Apple playlist, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Go next. Right. So just like quantum physics one evening, and I said, "Where do you get all this load from?" And she said, "Instagram." And I keep thinking, is HR and learning the next Instagram? You know what I mean? Well, just to answer that question, I think my view is very clear. I'm not a big fan of employee experience because I think we kind of overdo it and we end up doing a lot of rangolis. A lot of the expectation from HR and HR tech per se, when it comes to the leadership, to the business owner, is more towards how does HR drive productivity? So we've all run performance management at an individual level. But can you run performance management at an enterprise level? Now, tech solves for it. But it's not just one tech, it's a complete orchestration of tech. So before you start investing, have the end game in mind. Where do you want to go? What is your last use case? And that's what Ketan was also referring to, that if you do not have a use case in mind and you're investing in technology, you're going to be burning your fingers. Now, just to give you one example of how does enterprise performance management happens, it's a very simple piece to say that can everything HR and business be wired around something known as KPI, a key performance indicator. Now, if you just think about it, and again, stay with me on this one for about a minute or two. A KPI, if a KPI level was to go up for an employee, just think about it. The person is doing well. Can there be an automated reward and recognition journey be kicked off? Again, multiple technologies at play. But the more interesting one is where a sales performance has gone down. Let's suppose in the morning, the sales manager gets a nudge saying that, your daily run rate for today is about 100 rupees. And you're going to be able to do only about 80. Now, this is where predictive analytics come into play. So therefore, these are the 3 actions which you should do. One of them is check in with another colleague who's got about 3 extra leads in his funnel, and you could, possibly engage with them. That's where prescriptives come into action. And all of this is being done through the system. Now, what's happening in this whole thing, forget the tech, forget the tools and all of that. but somebody's thought through orchestration of an HR tech to say that what all would it impact. It's not an easy journey to engage in. I'll be possibly doing it in this organization for the third time. And it takes a play of a lot of things. Data lakes. Tech is the easiest to solve. It's the same learning and development platform, same performance management platform, but the way you orchestrate your entire HR tech delivers an end game which ends up resulting in higher levels of productivity. So I think that's what really is the key of all of this. And that's where the business leaders also love the HR folks saying that, okay, today you started talking less about just, employee experience, my ESAT scores have gone up or whatever, but you now start talking productivity, and that's what makes an employee happy. Nobody enjoys trophy perks. Tell me, all these people here would agree with me that just by putting a beanbag and a fancy coffee machine in the office doesn't mean that you have less attrition, right? The attrition rates still stay the same. But the minute an employee gets productive and they do well, he keeps looking at the watch. So the minute the employees do well, that's when the employee experience really takes a leap forward.
Thanks. I think you can start now, Rasich. Okay. So what has been your experience? You spoke about employee experience, and what are some ideas and some tech that has helped you, or some good ideas that would be good takeaways for our audience?
Yeah, so coming to the point of what we've actually done and implemented in the organization, so I would basically talk more about from a benefit standpoint, because largely I think for the last couple of years that's been one of our key focus points. So I think the fact that like I was just mentioning before, that employee well-being comes today as more of a package scenario, and of course compensation, pay, again, like Vikas mentioned, the productivity and what's in it for you in terms of the role, definitely very key criteria. But at the same time, I think today what an employee is actually looking forward from an employer is also how much of that again, more from a perspective of what's in it for me. How is this organization going to take care of what is important to me? What if there is a situation in the family, how is it that I'm going to be, for example, right now we have looked at implementing certain programs around the EAP, which is the Employee Assistance Program. Again, this was more of a psychological counseling which was done earlier, and it was more of a one-on-one. This is pre-pandemic I'm talking about. But over the phase of the last for whatever we have seen, I have actually seen employees go through very difficult circumstances. Facing personal loss. There's death in the family. There's so much of anxiety and stress and grief that it's very difficult for them to be able to come with their full self, their authentic self to work, and be able to deliver and become productive from the day one of something like this happening. So that's the time when we thought as a company what we could do different. So that's when we started exploring the market for various apps or various technology systems which could help us liaise with our employees more on a virtual basis, but also have that kind of connect. So of course we did a lot of study. There are a lot of various apps in the market. There are a lot of vendors in the market, but not everybody will give you that kind of experience which an employee is looking for. So you really have to understand what is the DNA of that organization, or whichever you partner with. Even if you're implementing an EAP program, it's not as simple as just get the vendor and get the policies in place, and now you shoot across in communication to all your emails saying, look, here's the contact and you can go here for any kind of coaching. So because there are so many of them today, but some of these apps, like for example, we have a vendor called Optum. So the apps that some of these guys have launched, wherein they can actually their analytics tools and etc. are so quick and so nice that it actually records a period of from the performance. How has this employee been doing? Has he had any kind of situation in the family? So again, these are confidential information. It's not always shared and stuff like that. But overall, it gives us some kind of analysis. It gives us some kind of information. Secondly, I would also like to just pick up from what Chryslynn just spoke about the DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion piece. Right now, I think there is a lot of, I mean, again, in terms of physical health, but because diversity is such a large piece in today's scenario, women's health, especially around fertility benefits and things like that, which is again something which many companies are now openly talking about, coming up front and accepting that yes, this is a thing which does sort of we have to include it, and it's not just something to do with you just have a program designed for LGBTQ or you look at your minorities from the community perspective, but more about again there's a different technological app called Maven which looks at family health, family support for various gender specific things in the DIB space. So again, these are some various technology arms which definitely helps in implementing some of the things which are applicable to the organization.
So Sudeep, you mentioned the 3 S's, and what is something that has worked in each of these areas? And
Yeah, I think
Is there a
little
tech angle
different
to it or
perspective,
not?
because I think the audience have been hearing something very serious for quite some time. I always talk about it. I think from the tech adaptation perspective, I think there are decision-making perspective, adoption perspective. I think the best way to connect to that and to relate to that is one movie of SRK. And it's a quiz, which movie I'm talking about. I'm definitely not talking about Pathan, but which movie which connects us to that. See here, it is talking about grey together. So it's called inclusiveness. It's called cross-functional agreement to something, right? I'm talking about a movie called Swadesh. I'm not sure how many of you have watched it. If not, watch it. It's a beautiful movie. It does not throw any action, but it teaches us a lot. Get together to understand what do we want. I think something which Ketan was saying. What do we want? The decision-making team or the team comes together and decides what do we want. First one. The second one is, once you have decided, follow the governance part of it. Too early, don't lose hope. Maybe we made a wrong decision. Too early, too easy to say. The governance, which also involves, which means make people to adopt it. And the next important thing is, you will face a challenge. The tech will not work. The expected result will not come. And that's the fun. Take it as a good fun to now break your head that how do I get the desired result? Of course, test to that you are getting the desired result. But don't give up too early that, oh, I'm not getting a good result. You need to work towards it to get a good result. So persistence is very important. So adoption stage and persistence. Please understand, it's a tech that you buy. But the adoption part is a human being factor. You can't hold a gun and say you have to do everything in this. But then you need to also ensure that out of 100 people, if 5 people are doing it brilliantly, come back to the social media thing. Populate that. Make it so very viral that the 95 people will come next morning and say, I want to be part of that. Just to give an example, we did it for one of our clients. It was a tech adoption in terms of employee productivity. Somebody who did it for one whole month was given a t-shirt to say that I'm a techie. He's not a techie, he's basically a service technician. But the rest 95 people said, I also want that t-shirt. Dude, you can't buy it. You have to work hard to earn it. It became viral. Within 2 months, they said, well, we have to think for the next policy now because everybody playing is qualifying. So you have to be smart to play around with this. I think that's what is my limited. And I've seen it getting implemented. I've seen people adopting. So persistence and have faith and see to it that people happily adopt it is what we need to focus on.
Yes. So I think I will touch upon one point when we are talking of HR tech and adoption. As an organization, we love HR techs. Everybody wants okay, this technology, that technology and all and everything. But how many times do we actually see what is the integration of this and how does it work with the organization? Most often than not, we buy discrete pieces. They don't talk to each other. We are not able to validate data. So we will have a one side one compensation system. We will have a performance management system somewhere else. We will have something which is an employee experience which tries and understands what the employee wants. But we are not able to feed the data into the other systems to give a complete picture to the management for decision making and action taking. So it's very important that when we start deciding what kind of HR technology we are going to invest in, try to look for those which will be able to talk to each other or integrate or figure out a way of how we are going to use the data for the other purposes, because each and every database is important and data integrity is important. And I had a challenge myself when I was implementing an HRMS, and we decided that we also wanted to implement a talent acquisition tool. And it was very difficult to find a tool which will talk to each other. And then when performance management came in, because we wanted a very robust performance management, but it didn't integrate with the HRMS. Now we can't go back and undo and buy another HRMS. So in the beginning itself, like I'm talking of not a larger organization, but maybe smaller organizations or startups who starts investing into it, and these are expensive investments, start thinking it through. When you start scaling up, that's when you actually need a lot of HR technology, and think through thoughtfully, because there are so much of options available in the market today. And Ketan rightly said that every organization has some or the other, startups are coming up with opportunities. But how do you actually integrate them together? At least look for a 3 to 5 years of run for the technology that you're using and for it to be meaningful. I think with that, I will rest it over here. Any other questions, Sayeed?
Yeah, no, there will be a lot of questions. I think we'll open it to the floor now. I think the panel is available. Any questions from the audience? I think we can take them now.
Yes, we can just see a show of hands and the mic will come to you. It was very, very insightful, I have to say.
Please ask questions, because no question has a very little meaning. All of us know, and it is not the same.
Yeah, like who knew Grammarly is not just a spell check? I didn't know that.
So I think to carry on the discussion as such, by the time we get some questions. Evaluation, what are the best practices, or do you have any advice on how to evaluate or try and figure out what would be the right approach to doing it? Because one of the things that Suchandra was mentioning is that you don't end up in a situation where you have to undo a lot of bad decisions that have been made.
Something that I learned from working in a product company or a company which has a lot of product activities, I think it's important that we as practitioners start to get into the shoes of a product manager. What I do now is when I have to take a product, I actually sit with the product manager, look at the format, the PRD or the BRD, we have all hated it, but I think it's a very valuable exercise. So writing down the expectations, the format, what's your objective, input, perspective, this thinking like a product manager is going to be very important for HR. What does a product manager do? They understand technology, they understand business, and they understand customer, and they can bring it together to create a solution that works well for you. Now, if say we as practitioners or product manager, we understand people, we have to understand technology, and we have to understand business. Now, once these three dimensions are done, I have always found the decision to be relatively easier, because a lot of time when HR tech products are somebody's pitching for it, because I have no idea what I want, everything that they say is good, it just starts to feel good to me. I don't know if that's happened with you. Suddenly, and then you're wondering, do I actually need it? And when I've actually gone ahead and implemented those, and I've realized I've not even used 20%, hardly used 20% of what I thought I was taking the product for. So this thinking as a product manager, going through the document of If you have a strong finance team, any which way you're supposed to do it. But I think this is something which has given me a lot of value of choosing what is right for us.
Because apart from knowing your requirements and knowing your objectives well, what other skills or whatever work needs to be done by the HR teams and the organizations to ensure that they get the right tools that will deliver the expectations that they have.
I think due diligence is like, it's a never-ending game, right? You do start from the use cases. You do start from, what do you really want to do the tech for, build tech. But I think when it comes to due diligence, I'll just be repeating and lifting and shifting whatever Ketan just said, but I'll just add it on and go a little tactical to say that when we do due diligence, especially with these new age solutions that the world of HR tech is really coming up with, I think we go wrong there because our view is pretty much to say, hey, listen, there's this one need that I need to solve. You can't solve all the needs in an organization, okay? And that's when you have things like app fatigue and so on and so forth. Again, I will just be repeating myself that what is your end objective? I mean, if you just thinking of performance management, that's not your end objective. Okay, so HRIS solutions per se, I think they are basically glorified Excels in the absence of intelligence. I mean, the minute they start providing intelligence, that's when they become better. So when it comes to due diligence, I think this is what I've learned, that when I look at products through PRDs and all of that, product features, I do involve business in a certain sense to say that, listen, before we do this selection, the final selection, see whether this tool is providing you with the intelligence, that you need to derive from it. And that's when you tend to kind of make the right decisions. Otherwise, it's just a nice fancy tech, and we love good screens. I know we launched in our platform with beautiful screens. People loved it. First few days, great adoption, good utility. About a month down the line, nobody's using it because there's no stickiness, there's no whip. So there has to be an abort strategy in place as well. It's not just about adoption.